Coming up on Lawmakers, the 2008 session gets off to an interesting start as the House overrides 12 of Governor Perdue's vetoes. Plans to revise Georgia's tax system gain momentum. And an exclusive interview with Lieutenant Governor Cagle. Those stories and more are coming up next.
This is Lawmakers, your source for all the news from under the Gold Dome. Here are your anchors, Nwandi Lawson and David Zelski.
Good evening and welcome to the first edition of Lawmakers, coverage of the 2008 legislative session.
Also on tonight's program, Governor Perdue, Lieutenant Governor Cagle, and House Majority Leader Jerry Keene outline a unified legislative agenda for the 2008 session.
But first, our top story. The House takes issue with several vetoes by Governor Sonny Perdue. The 2008 session of the Georgia legislature began today much like the 2007 ended, with House members voting to override a dozen vetoes issued by Governor Perdue last year. Lawmakers Sandra Parrish now joins us live from the Capitol with the rest of the story. Sandra.
Well, Nwandi, today's action was something promised by House leaders over the summer. Many thought it would be specifically entailing the line-item veto the governor issued in the 2008 budget that included many pet projects of House leaders. But instead, caucus members chose 12 other bills that they say received unanimous passage last year.
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to the authority of Article 3, Section 5, Paragraph 13 of the Georgia Constitution, I move the House vote to override the governor's veto, number 2, of 2007, House Bill 162, relating to sales and use tax exemptions for art centers and health clinics and related matters.
And so it went, one by one, House members overriding 12 of the governor's vetoes of bills ranging from tax credits to protections of the book allowance for Hope Scholarship recipients.
It's not our normal course of business, but the General Assembly feels passionately about our positions, and as reflected in the votes of the House and Senate, most of these bills unanimously, that this was good policy. We're elected, if you count a unanimous vote, it means every voter in Georgia was represented in a vote to unanimously pass these bills. So we do feel strongly about them.
They're good public policy. So with us, it was above politics. It was more about policy than politics. So with that regard, that's why we had the vote that we did from the Democratic side of the aisle.
On the gentleman's motion, the yeas are 147. The nays 22. The House has overridden the veto of the governor on House Bill 162. The matter shall be immediately transmitted to the Senate, where the Constitution of Georgia, not a statute, but the Constitution requires them as their oath to immediately consider, not to play a game. But I predict with a high degree of certainty that the other body that took an oath of office may very well shirk their constitutional responsibility and not address these matters.
Lieutenant Governor Cagle says while the Senate will consider the overrides in committee, he called today's actions by the House a display of petty politics.
The process the House has taken, they feel very serious about it, and we don't want to belittle that. But on the same token, we need to deliberate over what it is that they've done. I mean, these are, pretty serious issues, and we'll take them up and look at them.
Now, we received this statement from the governor's press secretary late this afternoon. It reads, Governor Perdue's vetoes were based on principles that have guided this administration well for the past 5 years. He articulated sound, logical veto messages, and he continues to believe these bills are not in the state's best interest. Today's actions are yet another example of House leadership insisting on making a statement rather than making the state better. Now, we expect Governor Perdue to have more to say after tomorrow's Eggs and Issues breakfast. Reporting live, I'm Sandra Parrish for Lawmakers.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Now, the Senate's day may have ended with the transferal of the House override to Senate rules, but it began with speeches from Senate leadership. Legislative Day 1 was short, as first days usually are, but a couple of resolutions dealing with water and health care were presented in the well.
I hope that you will join us as we try to continue to do something good for every citizen in this state.
Lieutenant Governor Cagle began the day with a speech of Senate expectations and priorities for 2008, which highlight health care, transportation, education, and water issues, which Senate Natural Resources Chairman Ross Collison says begins today.
This is a one-page resolution. On your desk, as the Lieutenant Governor has said, is a copy of the statewide water plan for you to take a look at and read. And feel free to call me. I'm working 24/7.
Senator Cecil Staten followed with the findings of a study committee which addressed concerns with the doctor and nurse shortage in Georgia. and also presented a resolution urging Congress to lift the current limitations on the number of resident doctors in Georgia. Senate President Pro Tem Eric Johnson also took the well to comment on the role and responsibilities of the Senate.
We need cooperation between the House and the Senate. We need it between the legislative and the executive branches to get this work done. But if we treat each other with respect, if we listen to each other's point of view, if we let every voice be heard, we can find the common ground that unites us and not divide us.
Now, legislative agendas from House and Senate leadership are expected at tomorrow's Eggs and Issues breakfast. However, a few of Lieutenant Governor Cagle's priorities are coming up in an exclusive interview later in tonight's program.
Well, harmony may not be the best term characterizing opening day of this legislative session, but last week, Governor Perdue was flanked by House Majority Leader Jerry Keene and Lieutenant Governor Cagle to outline a common agenda. Unity was the governor's message when he unveiled goals common to the General Assembly and the governor's office in the areas of education, transportation, water management, and health care, especially the role of Grady Memorial Hospital in a statewide trauma system.
We understand that when you have level 1 and level 2 traumas and you have to have the people and the technical and the professional medical experts on call 24 hours a day, there is a public cost to that. And we're looking forward to participating with our local hospitals across the state to enable them to give the best trauma network across the state, from transportation, from care from the docs to the hospitals, so that our citizens, wherever they live in Georgia, won't be subject to long times away from great expert trauma care.
Governor Perdue discussed the Health Insurance Partnership, or HIP, and Lieutenant Governor Cagle described ways to serve Georgia's 1.7 million uninsured.
We have to make sure that we meet those needs and we get more individuals insured. And I believe fundamentally that you do it through the free market. That's why I support what the governor's doing with the HIP program, but also the two initiatives that we're bringing forward. The health marketplace exchange concept, to where we're matching the need of insurance to the price in which an individual can afford.
Also at that press conference, Governor Perdue said he will continue to push last year's super speeders legislation to use increased speeding fines to fund trauma care. Will the General Assembly be eliminating property taxes this session? That is the aim of House Speaker Glenn Richardson's Georgia repeal of every ad valorem tax proposal, H.R. 900, known as the Great Plan. Lawmakers' Bridget Snapp is live at the Capitol with the latest. Bridget.
David, the Speaker's plan proposes a constitutional amendment that would do away with school and property taxes and replace them with an expanded statewide sales tax. The Great Plan is sure to be one of the most controversial measures this session, and the debate began even before the session did at a number of public forums last week. Many local level officials are concerned that a shift from locally collected property taxes to a sales tax that is collected by the state and then distributed to localities interferes with their locus of control and creates instability.
Essentially, the current Great Plan removes the link between the community's need to fund services and the community's ability to do so. And it does so by imposing a one-size-fits-all scheme on cities, counties, and school boards, each of whom have very distinct needs and varying resources.
In essence, it is a state-level constituency which is determining what local individuals, local citizens should be able to ask for from their government and how their government should be able to respond to them.
Property taxes are a consistent source of revenue. You can almost be assured that people are going to pay their property taxes. On the other hand, when you look at a sales tax, Mr. Representative, when you look at a sales tax, it is a very inconsistent and at times volatile source of revenue, primarily because you cannot dictate or predict a person's spending pattern.
Because schools are primarily funded by property taxes, education officials are concerned about the impact of such a shift.
The idea to eliminate property taxes seems to overlook the values and choices each local community contributes to improving education. School districts throughout the state are unique, and local sources of revenue allow the district to fund what is special, unique, and valuable to that community.
And my constituents are concerned that all we will end up with in Fulton County is supplying more money to other parts of the state without getting the return benefit.
There are also concerns that our state's most vulnerable citizens will feel the effect of this shift.
Low and moderate income will pay more, while upper income will pay less. And that's basically because as you shift from a property tax to a sales tax, those in the lower end of the income scale spend more of their money on taxable on taxable items than those at the upper end. The elderly who do not currently pay education property tax will end up paying more.
Among other potential opponents of the Great Plan are business owners who would have to collect a sales tax on everything from haircuts to pest control to legal fees. Despite the concerns voiced last week, key legislators remain positive about the plan.
So I don't think it's a drastic measure. It's a good measure because it's not just politicians making the decision. In the end, the people have to decide, did we make the right choice? And if they think we've made the right choice, then it passes constitutionally and it becomes part of the Constitution.
We've got 8 systems now that use the 1% local option of sales tax for education, and one of them's in my district, and they're not complaining at all. They're happy with it because they're a regional trade center, and they make money off of it. They keep their taxes low with it. So, you know, it's pretty hard to argue that you lose control with it when basically it's collected and sent back to you. And under the plan that's there today, I don't see a negative.
H.R. 900 is currently in the House Ways and Means Committee. Because it involves a proposed constitutional amendment, it will need to win a 2/3 majority approval of both houses to pass. Only time will tell how great the plan will be. Reporting live from the Capitol, I'm Bridget Snapp for Lawmakers.
Thanks so much, Bridget. Well, as the House worked toward the record override of 12 of the governor's vetoes, one legislator spent more time than any making his case and the case of the governor. Here's a sample of the debate led by Representative Rich Golick as he tries to persuade a former administration floor leader to retain the governor's veto of a sales tax exemption for amphitheater construction and a low-income health center.
Mr. Speaker, as with the debate earlier today on a previous bill, is it not true that tax bills deal with unique issues and should be considered individually?
Are you asking me if we've done that in the past or if that's how we should do it?
I'm just wondering about your opinion on it.
I would love if we did that. But we have on occasion merged 1 or 2 or 3 together.
Further parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Speaker.
State your inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, is it not true that the executive does support many of the provisions contained in the bills below, but that other provisions within the same legislation prevent him from signing them into law? The General Assembly has long held a policy of strictly adhering to the single subject rule when proposing tax incentive bills, and that each individual bill should be considered on its own merit.
Gentlemen, I recognize your role. I served in your role. But that is not exactly right, because this representative, when I was in your role, introduced a tax bill that had 14 different matters hung on it, and the administration signed that bill at that time. While that may be the best policy, we don't always adhere to that. As long as we comply with a single subject, this body, the House of Representatives, is charged with the constitutional responsibility of raising and appropriating revenue. And I'm going to trust your judgment on this one. All those in favor of the gentleman's motion will vote yes. Those opposed, no. And the clerk will unlock the machine.
And as with the other votes, the House agreed to override the veto of House Bill 162. That vote was 147 to 22.
Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle has now begun his second session as Georgia's first Republican lieutenant governor. I had a chance to sit down with him yesterday to discuss a few key initiatives for 2008, but began by asking him to reflect on his first year presiding over the Georgia Senate.
We had a good session, I think. As you know, coming in, we really set out to change the tone in the state Senate. We tried to work not on a partisan level, but really bringing people together and creating consensus around ideas and issues that really move our state forward. And I believe we were able to accomplish that. Of course, this session we'll continue to promote that. We have more minority members that are chairing committees as well as sitting on key committees. And I think that's the way the process needs to work in order to get the final product of public policy really encompassing all issues and all ideas to really move our state forward. So we're excited about this session. Of course, a lot of major issues that we'll be facing. Water, of course, being first and foremost, no matter where we go, even in state, but also out of state. I continue to have those questions asked to us.
What can the legislature do when it comes to the water issue? I know they've asked for people to use less, but where can the legislature step in?
We are experiencing the worst drought of Georgia's history. On average, we receive about 50 inches of rainfall a year. This year, we're somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 inches, so it's half the capacity that we have had. The 50 inches of rainfall equates to about 50 trillion gallons of water. Our total usage in Georgia is 1.2 trillion. So it demonstrates that we need to manage the resource better. The problem we have is the drought, but it's also the mismanagement of our core lakes by the Corps of Engineers. And that, of course, has put us at a huge disadvantage, allowing water to come out of the reservoirs to feed downstream mussels. And we have been negotiating with the Corps, getting relief there, which is very important. But we also have to analyze what can we do to ensure that we never get here again. And I think that is assessing existing reservoirs, determining how much additional capacity that would be available, that would, by increasing dam lengths and things of this nature, we would be able to compound more water. And so we've been focused on that, along with building new regional reservoirs, which is very, very important. I think that articulating within a two-year time frame strategy, as well as within a 5 to 10 year time strategy, is very important, and we plan to do that. And then, of course, on top of that is our statewide water management plan, which the Water Council will be making their recommendation before the legislature. It is a question of quality, but also quantity, and the water plan will lay that out.
One of the most talked about issues, other than water, leading into the session has been taxes and tax reform, and we've seen several plans laid out there. What do you currently support, and what do you hope to see by the time the session's over?
I continue to support the elimination of income tax for senior citizens. I think that's a great initiative that will put us not at a competitive disadvantage like we currently are, but level the playing field. I think targeted tax cuts that lead to job promotion, like helping out industries with energy taxes, things of this nature are good proposals. The Speaker has put forth a plan, obviously, to shift taxes away from property taxes and put it across the board on an increase in sales. That proposal will be out there. I think the debate is very healthy. The debate is very serious because we see property taxes growing at a rate much higher than inflation and population, and we need to get a handle on that. I think the question becomes, how do you resolve the issue? It is my belief that most people in Georgia feel an obligation or a sense of duty to pay property taxes, and in doing so, they want to make sure that they're getting the most services for what they're paying. And I think many people feel that local control is a big part of the taxation code with ad valorem. But they don't they're very infuriated, just like I am, when you get a property tax bill that is doubled over last year. And so we're going to be focused on ensuring that we have real measurable caps in place, that we have a uniform tax code, something that makes sense, that doesn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, but makes sure that it's predictable and it's fair.
What else would you like to see come out of the 2008 session whenever it ends, whether it's April, March, possibly?
Well, I'd certainly like for us to get out of here as soon as possible. You know, I tell you, for me, it's about finding, solutions to the problems that we face. And clearly we're in a water crisis. Clearly we have transportation concerns. Clearly there's 1.7 million people that are uninsured. We don't have a trauma network system in place. All of those are real problems that are facing us. We don't need to be in an environment to where we just disagree on everything, but we have an obligation, because the people of Georgia have put their trust in us to ensure that we can make Georgia the very best that it can be, where hopes and dreams come alive. And when unfortunately people can't get to and from work, or if we can't supply the water needs, or if we can't make education the very best that it can be, then we're not going to have that prosperous Georgia that we all want. And so it's about making sure that our focus is clear, and that's moving our state forward to ensure that the American dream is alive and well here in Georgia. We have so much to be thankful for, but those areas of concern, we got to find real solutions. We're putting forth proposals that I think are going to make a difference in the end, and we're not going to take our focus off of that.
Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle, thank you so much for joining me today.
David, thank you.
Now, the Lieutenant Governor and I's conversation was actually last Tuesday, not yesterday. We'd like to make a correction on that. But we also had a chance to talk with him about transportation and education issues, which we will plan to bring you tomorrow on Lawmakers. Well, it seems that gun rights will also be on the legislative agenda this session. The debate is already heating up, pitting the right to bear arms against the rights of property owners. Lawmakers' Sandra Parrish has that story.
The National Rifle Association is lobbying hard to pass House Bill 89. The measure was introduced last year to allow gun owners to carry weapons anywhere in their vehicles, but was amended with House Bill 43 to allow employees to keep firearms in their cars at work.
What some of these companies are trying to do is put the employee in a position of making a Hobbesian choice, where between your freedom, your right to personal protection, and your job and your fear of prosecution and arrest. And that's not fair.
The NRA says allowing employees to take guns to work is a matter of safety, but the remarks drew fire from opponents who say the national group didn't consult local members.
And this law would stop me from being able to control my property.
Bob Thornton, a self-professed NRA member and former business owner, says HB 89 tramples on the rights of business owners.
I'm not against guns, but I'm against having one individual right, the Second Amendment, trample another individual right, the right to property. Those two should work that out in civil court.
For now, Representative Tim Bearden, sponsor of the original legislation, is pushing his new bill, HB 915.
This is about making sure law-abiding citizens have the right to defend themselves. There are so many places off limits right now that you cannot even take a firearm.
I'm here today to stand beside Representative Bearden and support him in introducing what I see as the most historic piece of legislation in Georgia ever on the right to bear arms.
Local gun support groups are rallying behind the measure, complaining the current laws in Georgia are among the most restrictive in the nation.
But one example, we have a mass transit law in this state that no other state has. It is a felony in this state with 20 years in prison and a $15,000 fine to have a firearm in the parking lot of Hartsfield or MARTA, or even within a reasonable distance adjacent to a bus stop. And no other state in the nation has that law, and that applies even if you have a firearms license.
The Senate Rules Committee will take up House Bill 89 tomorrow. In the meantime, Senator Judson Hill has dropped another gun rights bill. His deals with carrying guns in state parks. We'll have more on that plan tomorrow. Reporting from the state capitol, I'm Sandra Parrish for Lawmakers.
Well, in other news, vowing to have a 40-day presence at the state legislature this year, the Georgia NAACP released its 2008 legislative agenda today. At the top of the page, fighting the controversial GREAT plan to eliminate ad valorem taxes from education funding.
It's being sold as a tax reduction, and for many of our constituents, those who are retired, who pay no property tax at all, those who are in low income and moderate income who have exemptions from groceries now, this is going to be a real tax burden shift to those who can least afford it in the state, and at the same time giving a free ride for our state infrastructure, public education infrastructure, to rich landowners and landlords. And we just don't think that this is a sufficient way to move Georgia forward.
The agenda also includes public and charter school reform, indigent defense, children's health care, and mortgage lending.
We believe that if Georgia had stronger and tighter controls on their mortgage industry, then Georgia would not be ranked currently number 4 and pressing towards number 3 in the subprime meltdown that has occurred. And these have occurred not by shady, shifty people, loan sharks. These are mainline communities, community banks, which have big names, Wells Fargo, City Financial, etc., that funded these front shops and shopped their predatory products to African Americans, and so we call on the state to do something about that.
Senator Vincent Fort says he'll work to restore provisions of an anti-predatory lending law he sponsored in 2002.
The fact is that our chickens are coming home to roost. In the last year, we've seen what weakening the predatory lending law has done. It's weakened. By weakening the law, we've made hundreds of thousands of Georgians vulnerable to the worst predatory lenders one could imagine.
Other NAACP priorities include tightening hate crime penalties, mental health care, a trauma network that includes Grady Memorial Hospital, divestment from Sudan, and an apology for the state's role in slavery.
But I do want to let you know, even though we have Georgia's apology for slavery as number 10, it's number 1 on our heart, considering Georgia led the South in hanging its African-American citizens.
A late session effort to pass a slavery apology resolution last year failed. Senator Fort says that in order to succeed, more legislators need to be involved in drafting the legislation.
Supporters of legislation that would outlaw abortion in Georgia hope a resolution introduced last year will move forward this session. The Georgia Pro-Life Unity Group rallied at the Capitol today in support of H.R. 536. Lawmakers Minu Hosseini has more on that story.
The rally focused on passage of an amendment to Article 1, Section 1 of the Georgia Constitution. As it stands, paragraph 29 says that a person's inherent rights should not be denied. The Pro-Life Unity Group hopes to amend it to read that life begins at fertilization and that the right to life cannot be denied regardless of age, race, sex, health function, or condition of dependency.
Basically, this legislation would challenge Roe v. Wade. So obviously, when it's passed by the people of Georgia, litigation will break out, and it will make its way to the Supreme Court. And if we win, then at that point, if an abortionist performs an abortion and kills a baby, then he can be prosecuted for murder because that baby will have the same rights as you or I would have.
If passed, the amendment would outlaw abortion in Plan B. The legislation is currently in the House Judiciary Committee. If adopted, it could be seen on the ballot as early as November. For Lawmakers, I'm Minu Hosseini.
And coming up tomorrow on Lawmakers, the Georgia Chamber of Commerce holds its annual Eggs and Issues breakfast, and the Grady Coalition comes to the Capitol seeking funding support for Georgia's largest public hospital. We'll have all those stories and the latest from under the Gold Dome tomorrow night at 7 p.m. This Wednesday, we hope you'll join us online for Governor Perdue's State of the State address. David and I will be hosting a live webcast of that address at 2 p.m. on gpb.org. And if you've missed any part of this Lawmakers broadcast, tune in tomorrow morning when Lawmakers repeats at 5:30 a.m. Now, stay tuned for Georgia Outdoors. Tonight's episode features Georgia's state symbols. Georgia Outdoors is coming up next here on GPB. And, of course, coming up tomorrow, the big Eggs and Issues breakfast. We're going to get to see a little bit more of the unveiling, I guess, of the governor's legislative agenda for this year.
We'll get to see his. We'll get to see Lieutenant Governor and the Speaker as well. The Speaker is probably going to be talking about the tax reform that you heard a lot of today. Lieutenant Governor always, like this year and last year, he stuck with 4 issues: education. He stuck with many others that he had. But anyway, we will have more on that tomorrow. That is our broadcast for this, the first legislative day of 2008. I'm David Zelski.
And I'm Nwandi Lawson. Please have a great evening and join us tomorrow evening. Good night.
This has been a production of Georgia Public Broadcasting.